Wow.
There are mountains near the halfway.
It's
Ready?
very cool. That's gorgeous.
2020.
Try to, I mean, some of the stuff sounds pretty.
So this is our third seminar of our new department. We're going around the horn here with all our faculty, getting to know each other better. Today we have Wilson Wang, he's really from California, so we have to know, that's the main introductory comment I have. But look where he's been in his training. He loved Berkeley, that was clear. But he got his MPH there, and then he got his medical school from MD from Davis. Then came east and went to the Harvard Kennedy School for an MPA. He went to college at Berkeley too. So started in California, came to Harvard, and then got into the real world as much as anyone can. And I think makes Wilson very special. He listed these countries, I'm sure there's more where he has worked: Rwanda, Liberia, Indonesia, and Guatemala. That's pretty, except for the Middle East, you got pretty much the whole world covered there. Working for NGOs, and then I had the most interesting thing in your CV is you were a legislative assistant for Senator Lieberman. That must have been quite that was from 2004 to 2006. When did he run for vice president after?
Before I left, when he became an independent. I was working with him when he was a Democrat.
Okay.
That's a key.
Okay. Interesting. And then was medical director at the New York City Department of Health for East Harlem from 2007 to 2011, and still works, I know, in the pediatric emergency room there. And it must be challenging to do that still. And he's been here since 2015. Not on our faculty, but I guess also I think you were an adjunct, is that right? And you were also taught at Columbia and George Washington. And then lastly, I will tell you that he is a founder and CEO of Walking Doctors. I guess you'll talk about that a little bit today, or a little bit. So, which is an international organization that is involved in development of electronic health records. So Wilson really brings to us an enormous amount of real world experience after wonderful training. And so he's been with us now. This is his third year as the visiting faculty member. I know your students love you, and with good reason. So please, you're welcome. And he's going to talk with an interesting title: Anti-Prejudice Engineering and Health Settings.
Well, thank you so much for this opportunity. I love speaking with peers, so I can get a nice dynamic, especially those who help me every day, and that starts with the students who sort of keep me young and fresh.
I should tell you, we have how many online?
16.
16.
Okay.
Just so you know, they're out there. I don't know who they are, but they're out there.
Yeah. There's all you influentials on Zoom. Currently in shorts, making a grilled cheese sandwich. Mike, of course, I regard you as like a modern Jon Snow.
Oh my God.
Dr. Caravanos like single-handedly can gauge temperature of both the school and the street. And Dr. Moaz can't, he's my sort of office mate. He's downstairs correcting memos, but he reminds me to retain faith in the UN. So this talk title is Anti-Prejudice Engineering Health Settings. And I guess another title could be How to Control Active Bias so People of Color Are Not Injured. This is always relevant for me in the work I do, and you'll see some of that. But especially now during the Israel invasion of Gaza, I want to say that most of my sourcing is not from academic training for this talk. It's mostly from opportunities I had with the Commonwealth Minority Health Policy Scholars Program that brought me to the East Coast in 2004. And then more recently, but not that recently, the Robert Wood Johnson Culture of Health Leaders Program that really talked about if you wanted to be serious as a health professional, you had to engage issues of race and prejudice. So I actually did not want to give this talk because I have been, I guess, raised to not want to be so public. A lot of people don't know that I was born and raised in Salt Lake City, Utah, and it was the
You
beginning.
didn't put that on your CV.
I did not. I should go to the top of the TV. It was the beginning of the 70s and the end of the Vietnam War. And so I was Taiwanese. I am Taiwanese American, but I was often mistook as Vietnamese, which was confusing to me. And subject to various epithets. Later, I played basketball at East High School, the one that's like in the movie, like me and Zac Efron, that type of thing. Except I used to say that I was the black guy on the basketball team. There were no people of color. And every time we played basketball against the opposing team, whenever I touched the ball, the crowd would yell. And I found that very nerve-wracking. So I was a point guard, so my assist ratio was extremely high. But I guess it's all to say that I felt for a while that when I spoke or just walked around, that I somehow was representing all East Asians, and it was a tremendous burden to bear. Then, just to fast forward very quick, to college, my best friend was reading a book called F Yes. And the idea was that when everyone asks you to do something, you're supposed to say F yes, no matter what it is. But the idea that fear is what often impedes our ability to find ourselves and our voice. And so I took that to heart. And so that's sort of the context of me wanting to speak with this group. So this talk has the following objectives. The first is I'm going to talk about how I learned about a path to racism. And this is going to involve terms that you're familiar with, such as bias and prejudice, maybe some that you're less familiar with, like power and heuristics. And then we're going to not just be nihilistic, we're going to talk about how do you improve the system in the shorter term. So it's not really fast, but it is shorter, and then the longer term. And you see in the middle, this is where I introduce a little bit about my stuff in technology. I do have a startup. What I found in this startup is that the solutions to today's problems have very little to do with technology, but they certainly could assist in the cause. Well, let me just start with a question. If I were to ask you to just think, what work-life event makes you most proud? Could you think of that? And you deserve to think about that. Give yourself a pat on the back. It usually will involve some challenge in overcoming it. It usually will involve something a little bit greater than yourselves, and it usually will be in community. Will you raise your hand? Did that apply to anybody? There are a lot of accomplished people here. Well, for me, I think about my time when I was a school teacher. I had just graduated from Berkeley, and I didn't know what to do. And so I became a school teacher in Oakland, California, which is right next to Berkeley. And I think what I liked most about it is that I finally got a chance to apply academics to the world. I just was always confused why I would calculate the probability of a ball that I'm bouncing against a wall to go through it. That didn't really resonate with me. I also was able to find my style and my voice because it was so public, because you just had to deliver in that setting. I remember the first lesson they gave us in teacher training is not to smile until Christmas. And it was very difficult for me, and I was not really a good teacher until after Christmas, when I realized that I could be myself and still be prepared, but still be okay. And another reason why I really liked it was because I just found that I love children. And it basically made me decide later to become a pediatrician. Again, like the students here, I just felt tremendously cool to be around them, and they taught me to talk a little bit more casually, or to dance even. And I also saw in them that I wanted to use whatever I could to safeguard children. Because many of these kids, even at 14 and 15, the boys especially, they never imagined themselves living beyond 21. It was just that melodramatic. And I just committed that I would do everything to change that. But the lessons were learned, and they were not quick. And I remember the very first day of school, I walked into the school, and in California, the schools are built down because we have so much land. And so everyone's waiting outside of hallways. And there's a lot of kids, right? Just like middle school, their hormones, there's stuff flying in the air, very loud. And when I walked in, all of a sudden quiet. And this guy, a boy, jumped out in front of me, and I remembered his white teeth. And he said, "Look, we have a Chinese teacher," and everyone laughed. And then I remember fumbling with my keys, trying to get into the hallway that would lead to my classroom. So what was that? Why would my first impression of a young boy who later became Marcus, who was a clown, smart clown just like me, really, just a smaller version. And what was it that they had to identify me as the other? I was Taiwanese American. Why was I a Chinese teacher, and what exactly did that mean? So let me explain what was happening. The first part of this bias that puts a shortcut about what people should be into our heads, is that we don't exist in a vacuum, and that there are racial narratives that permeate our everyday. So it may be not as egregious as our country's centuries of slavery, but I remember when I was young, how we could stay up. We get to stay up after 9 if Gone with the Wind was playing. And it would happen once a year. It was so exciting. But this story is basically about slavery was bad, but there were good slave owners too. And I also remember on Saturdays that the family, my mom would bake wheat bread, honey wheat bread. It was so great. And we get to watch Shirley Temple. I love this. So here's an excerpt of what I'd watch.
Have you got enough?
No, child. It's going to take more money than what we got.
How do people get money?
I know how to get some more money. Come on, honey child. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah. Ho. Ho, 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 ho.
Well, not to be outdone, I think this was my first role model. And it served a purpose because everyone left me alone when I was a kid, because everyone thought I knew Kung Fu. Until someone hit me and I realized I didn't know Kung Fu. And I do remember too, this was so fun, the Pink Panther. And in the Pink Panther, to train Inspector Clouseau, there has to be this guy that knows martial arts that attacks him in secret. It's his friend, but he does still attacks him in secret. As I was preparing this clip, I realized the only one who ever gets hurt is the Asian guy. But it kind of shows you that there is some entertainment value to this as well. It's not like it's not fun. And then let's not leave behind Pocahontas. And I think Pocahontas in this analogy is just more of confusing. Like there were some happy Native Americans after all. And then, but juxtaposed to other realities. I thought that was an amazing statistic. The population has now risen, but there were 5 to 10 million Native Americans when the colonists landed, and then 300,000 in 19. Okay, so you have these stories, but they're just stories. But what happens when you add the human mind to stories? And then here we'll talk about heuristics. So these are just simple mental shortcuts that we all use, and they are neutral in their utility. And I just want to give you a few examples of these heuristics. All right, Mike, what does that say? Yeah.
Sing in the spring.
Yeah. Okay, Jeff.
Sing in the spring.
Yeah. Kira.
Sing in the spring.
You sure? Patricio.
Sing in the spring.
Good.
Oh, my God.
Oh,
All right. Okay. All you biostatisticians. A bat and a ball cost $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Riley, come on.
I know my answer is the wrong answer.
You're job hunting. This is like the job interview type stress.
I would say 10 cents, but I don't think that's correct.
No?
I already said the same.
What? All these smart students, you sure? Here's your statistics. Got it? Believe me? $1 more than the ball. Okay, last one. This one you don't have to reveal too much about yourself, but this is more statistical. If you ask Americans if they're happy, what percentage do you think will say they're happy? Maybe your answer will probably depend upon whether you're happy. 80%. But if you ask them first, when's the last time they went on a date? It'll go down to 50%. And these are the same people. Okay, so what's going on? This is very well developed cognitive behavioral theory by Tversky and Kahneman. And they basically show that in our brains, although it doesn't look like this in our brains, there's system one and system two thinking. Where system one is really fast and it's just a very quick, it's kind of what you need for the reflexes. And that there's system two, which we in public health or health like to think, oh, cognitive, logical, calculating. But system one almost always wins. Now there are three heuristic types: anchoring, representative, and availability. So in the example of Sing in the Spring, that you just grabbed whatever was available in your mind, right? You don't read word for word, you're just reading in a block, right? The example of calculating the price of a bat and a ball, that is a representative type equation, right? Just, it's supposed to be very easy. $1 plus 10 cents equals 110. Very hard to get away from what type of things you expect for that type of question. And then finally, there was what was the last one? Oh yeah. Here, you're anchoring the individual in their last memory. And then that is influenced by the next question. So here's an example. It turns out that if a black and a white man commit the same crime, they always have different sentences, with the black individual having a 20% longer sentence. What type of heuristic is going on in the judge's mind? You guess, out of those three? The idea is that there's so many images of blacks committing crimes on media, television, etc., that even the judge would have that heuristic in their head.
You can see these Knicks exuding confidence, especially Lynn looking to take Kobe to the rack.
Kobe tries to thwart him. Walker for three. And a rebound by Jeffries. Lynn from deep. Got it again.
You have to love it. You have to love the way this ball club has stepped up to play down the stretch here in the fourth quarter with Jeremy Lin leading the way.
A new star is born in the NBA. 23-year-old Jeremy Lin. 34 points on what has been a career night.
I mean, you gotta love Jeremy Lin. Were you raise your hand if you're here for the Linsanity? Are you aware of what that was? Okay, so Mike.
But he was accepted,
He was.
Harvard grad.
In terms of, yeah, and Harvard grad. In terms of his ranking on the top X amount of players, would you say he's top 50, top 100, top 500, or top 1,000?
Ever?
Yeah, in terms of his span.
None of them.
What would you say?
Oh, at the time he played, you mean, or forever?
Yeah, at the time he played.
At best, your last, the
Top 10, top 1,000, right?
Yeah, at best.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure that, but probably, yeah.
Top 20. I mean, sorry,
But one season, maybe.
yeah, no, in fairness. But to think he was the top 15th player of all time in his first 20 games,
Yeah, that
most people don't get that. Most Asians won't get that, and we love Jeremy Lin. So what's the heuristic?
there are very few Asian basketball players.
Yeah, he's not representative. We like to prototype what people are allowed to do using this heuristic. Okay, final one. This was in the New York Times, and it featured children at school not looking at planes in wonder, but out of fear. It was a very effective article. What type of heuristic is the artist or the writer deliberately using? Anchoring. Children, school, innocence. And that will basically set the tone and the music for the rest of the story. Okay, so the theory is heuristic plus the racial narrative equals racial bias. And our friends at Harvard study bias to see if this actually works, if it's actually true. This is very fun and you should all do it. It's called implicit bias. This is about 3.2 million people now. You basically stick your finger on two keys and they're going to show you pictures of whites, blacks, or you can do whites, Asians. Usually it's relative to white, because the dominant culture in terms of power. And then they associate good, bad to see if you are equal in being able to tap someone who's white with good as someone who's black with good. Make sense? So your ideal is what I've put in the yellow, that you want to be equally fast at sorting good and at assorting black with good and white with good. Does that make sense? So here you see that if you're 40 to 49, okay, let's move here since this is my age group, we're 18% of us can do that well. But the vast majority cannot associate good with black as well as good with white. In fact, it's about 68% here and about 18% here. And that goes across the ages. It doesn't matter if you get old. In fact, the older you get, you probably get a little bit worse, How about education? Do you think that would decrease our bias? The degrees by our name? Isn't that why you come to this school? Decrease your bias? No. We are exactly the same as someone in high school in terms of ability to look at people equally. I once had a counselor, or maybe we call him psychologist, and I went to that psychologist in part because I felt like I was having things in my head that I didn't like. And the psychologist said to me, I don't care what's in your head. No one does. They only care what you do. And so that's this next section. We could have natural bias and that's fine, but it only becomes an issue if it gets actual, if it gets acted upon. And for that, you already have the bias, you just need reinforcing stories. You need to show that that story was not just some fiction in the past, that it happens on the day-to-day. So if you would give me that the first vignette about representation of blacks in the media at least was a little dehumanizing, that's going to be reinforced by the everyday where blacks are constantly killed by the police and everyone knows 99% of the time the blacks will go free. I mean, the police will go free. What is the impact on the unconscious psyche about that happening on the day-to-day? Well, we already knew the Asians didn't have the strongest reputation outside of martial arts. So how about when the Asian culture is associated with a virus that affected us all? This was our president. The president of the United States said this basically, and then this is what's happening to someone like me. And I was born here in Salt Lake City, Utah. Even in public health. I was talking to a public health professional and she really rightfully said, you don't need to go abroad to practice global health. The issues that we want to impact exist right here, and this is Native Americans. this is not deployed with any malice, but I would just say, have you ever been called any of these things? And if you were called these things, what kind of setup, what kind of impact does that have for you chronically? So we are saying racial bias plus reinforcing experiences equals racial prejudice, the action of prejudice. So you just have to ask people of color if they've experienced prejudice. I would say there's not 1 week, and I don't have it as bad, where I don't experience some prejudice. Even yesterday it happens. Go back home. I'm like, again, I'm at home. Who's talking to me? It's crazy, right? And I don't even have it that bad. Hey, this is kind of funny. Active bias has so many different effects. I went to my 35-year reunion. I didn't want to go, but I went, and it was really fun. It was fun. I mean, these are people I grew up my whole life. Of course, you're not going to be able to find me here. But at one point, it was so funny. This guy came up so excited. He just said, I just want you to know, Wilson, that you are so inspiring to me. I'm like, oh, why? Why? I mean, I know I probably am, but why? And he said, just your ability to come to this country not speaking English. You barely have an accent. This is someone I grew up with.
Where are you?
Yeah, you got it.
Okay.
It's high school.
In my high school reunion, yeah, East High, Zach Everett. Okay, so we're almost to the end of the path, We have racial prejudice plus what equals racism? What do you think that Shazam thing stands for? Power. There you go. So power comes in different forms. It definitely comes in our judicial system. I decide to rank them in order of most dislike. By me. Yeah, sorry, not the public. Joe, who's number 1? You must love her.
Maybe.
Yeah. Test yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But my number 2, sorry, is Mr. Thomas or Judge Thomas. When I was working in the United States Senate for Lieberman, I felt like I was playing basketball again in East High School because there were very few people of color on staff and even less people of color who were senators.
His being Jewish wasn't very good either.
It was, he was amazing. It's amazing. CEOs, US presidents. Another place for power is money. So just like on the previous slide, you see there's unequal representation and distribution of wealth in the United States, with whites owning 80% of national assets and other and Black and Hispanic with the rest. I thought this was worthwhile. This is talking to an individual about power and understanding how it would relate to racism.
I mean, how do you feel about the war? I mean, I know you have friends that might be in there.
Yes, I'm worried about them. And after they will be home, I don't care what happens with Gaza. I really don't.
You don't care?
I don't care. Shoot them all. I don't care. I don't care.
That right there is a sentiment I've heard repeatedly from grieving, traumatized Israelis. Shoot them all. Eliminate Gaza. Erase it. And off in the distance, where plumes of black smoke are rising out of Gaza, Israel is retaliating hard. Israel's government has vowed to take out Hamas and is expanding its military campaign in Gaza just a few miles away, where at least 2,700 people have been killed. More than 800 are children. It's under siege, civilians are trapped inside, neighborhood blocks are reduced to rubble, and access to the devastation in Gaza is harder to recount with so few journalists inside. The borders are sealed.
So, if I ask what is racism, the equation I would say is racism is racial prejudice with power. But the actual definition is that people of color are put in harm's way by the system over and over again in a way that can be predicted. This happened yesterday, the bombing of a hospital. But I think what's more interesting, if not tragic, is that who did not predict that that would happen, given the certain situation. I've done a lot of international health, and it looks like tremendous rescue efforts are being made, but Mike could attest and Joe can attest that the fact that you're trying to breathe for someone through a tube with your hand, and there's no medicine going into your to your arm, means that things are quite dire. And this is the geography. Meanwhile, our president has landed, and he did just conclude that Israel was not responsible for the deadly blast. Coming back home, racism has meant that there are 2.3 million Black men in jail, out of proportion with the percentage of Blacks in the population. And this is kind of my area. This is controlling for race. I'm sorry, it's controlling for insurance, education, and income. And we see that Black Americans are 36 less likely to receive the #1 intervention for heart attack. Like if we in this room get a heart attack, we're getting PCI. Black women are 60% less likely to receive evidence-based treatment for ovarian cancer. Sometimes you don't die. How about if you just need pain medicines? 57% unlikely to get pain medicines. How about little children? 12% only get morphine 12% of the time when they have diagnosed appendicitis. How about just getting people to be quiet? 63% increase that you'll be sedated and in the emergency room. And finally, if you don't speak the language, 40% of the time you're not getting your discharge instructions in your own language. So you might not exactly know what to do. What I just showed are what we call social determinants. We're talking about issues of income. We're talking about issues of work and access to care. But the premise of this talk is that it's not social determinants of health. It would be racism determinants of health. So what to do? Well, it's kind of like, where's Waldo? These are the places that you could influence according to this path. And we'll have to take some things away, right? You can't get rid of your heuristics. You're going to get rid of racism, racial biases, because they're the product of the other things. So then you can focus on what's on the star. So let's look at trying to get rid of reinforcing experiences. So I'm just going to show you examples of what I do in my profession, both at an individual level and then at a structural level. So I find that the care that people have come to the hospital with disease that has taken time to develop. And it's very difficult to just expect the diagnosis and treatment in the moment, in the emergency room where I work. But I find that the system doesn't really have much continuity. So I could pretend to send them to their primary doctor, but they don't really have a primary doctor. So I decided to extend the experience with my phone. And so for 20 years, I give out my phone to my patients. And this would be a very typical interaction. Oh, this was a kid that she came in, a teenager in East Harlem. She came in, her heart rate was at 140, and she was very, very nervous. But I know she can't have a heart attack. And then I found out that she'd taken a cold medicine called Mucinex to get rid of the mucus. I said, oh, I think, and I had to look it up on Google. I don't know. I said, and it was a known side effect, but I didn't know, and I didn't want to keep her there for 5 hours to make sure that her heart rate would go down when she looked great. So I just said, stop the Mucinex, and then give me a text. Oh, hi, Dr. Wong, Leland's symptoms are really better. She hasn't taken any more Mucinex. Oh, yay, what a relief. Thanks for telling me. I learned too. Oh, thank you so much. Very simple. Very simple. Sometimes it get a little bit more complicated when it's a different language and it involves like a knee, right? This case, it's a red knee. They have antibiotics, but there's a confusion as if this is actually in the joint. If it's in the joint, it's a medical emergency. If it's in the skin, then you can just go to treat it, right? So I just make sure that it goes away. She took another picture of her time. Oh, está un poco mejor. That's great. Yeah. Continue with the antibiotics. And then I was so embarrassing, I accidentally wrote in English, and they wrote back in English just as well. What was I speaking Spanish for? But just to keep on practicing, I started continuing speaking in Spanish. And basically asked a question like, oh, but is the skin is peeling? Is that dangerous? Like, no. But not everyone knows that. So I said, don't worry about it. You can pick it with your fingers. Thank you so much. Thumbs up. So that's one way to take the experience of individuals and to show them a different experience and show other people say, oh, you get to text Dr. Wong? How come I want to text Dr. Wong? So, but there's another technique, and the analogy is canary in the coal mine. You ever heard of that? It's basically, I don't know if it's urban more actually, but because I don't work in a coal mine. But basically the idea is that you're a miner in the coal mine and you take a canary in case there's too much carbon monoxide down there. And if all of a sudden you see your canary die, you're like, shoot, I gotta leave and go back up. In the analogy, unfortunately, the canary is a person of color. But the idea is that if you save the coal miner by altering the context in which the canary died, then everyone gets saved. And that is more palatable politically, at least. So remember I told you these health outcomes due to racism. Well, look at the performance of the general population, right? So Black women were 60% less likely to receive the right treatment, but look, the general population was only at 24%. Look at our use of pain reduction medicines for children with appendicitis. It's just generally bad. So you could make the argument, let's just make the system better for everyone. And you would want to do that. You'd want to do that because of this. What percentage of us will die of a medical error in the current system? What do you think? 10%. Fourth leading cause of death. If you flew every single day and could live as long as you wanted, how long would it take to die in a plane crash? Like it would crash, right? Statistically, it has to crash. 18,000 years. The quality of movement in healthcare is based on the engineering that happens in the cockpits of airplanes. And so this is what I came up with. I came up with an electronic health record that's checklist based, that no matter what you think of the individual, once you think about the diagnosis, you're going to methodically go through it. And of course, you have to do convenience factors for the doctor. It writes the notes, it does the billing. You know, they're not going to just do what you want to. And I'm just going to give you a short example. This is kind of what it looks like. Now I'm working in places that have nothing, just so you know. So I think this is kind of cool. You see in this example that someone has right knee pain for a day. And so the person's saying, oh, wow, maybe I think it's an infected knee. I think it's osteomyelitis. And so I give a little background about what osteomyelitis is in case the doctor forgot. I remind that maybe it's not osteomyelitis. It's called a differential diagnosis. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's Lyme disease. And then the individual checks what applies in the history, in the physical, and you see the notes getting written on the right side. Doctors hate writing notes. That's just very good. But then as the person's writing this out, they says, wait, doubt the diagnosis if the pain severity is only mild. So this checklist is supposed to create some cognitive dissonance if the patient doesn't kind of conform to the charting. And so the idea is that the individual would, the doctor, the provider would choose a different checklist. In this case, no, mild pain, no fever, no other symptoms. I think it's Lyme disease. Oh, I don't know Lyme disease. I'm from the West Coast. Again, background, learn about it, and then start charting. Here's an example how we can use some technology just to put a picture. Oh my gosh, that wasn't ringworm. That was a target lesion. That's a lesion that would be significant for the diagnosis of Lyme disease. So I'll see how I'll let you just watch. So if some things don't apply, you'd only pick the things that apply. It's writing the note. And these are protocols, right? These are diagnostic protocols that have been structured. To make the diagnosis, you have to look at the fluid in the knee. You order it. This reduces charting from 15 minutes to 1 minute. But one problem with the implementation I've had is a lot of doctors use 0 minutes to chart. So my 1 minute is an impediment. Here, we do automatic dosing of medicines because sometimes it's hard to remember 5,000 medicines and what the dose would be. So we just routinize the dosing. You can always change though. You never want to handcuff healthcare providers to get upset. Oh, patient education, what's that? Oh, remind the individual to do patient education. And then they conclude the visit and this gets structured. It's clean. The other big piece of this is that because the encounter is structured, we can provide real-time performance metrics to leaders of a system, just to be able to say what percentage of the diagnoses were correct or what percent of the treatment, and then to look specifically at the illnesses in question, and then look at some efficiency factors too. I always say, I have gotten more supervision when I was an ice cream scooper at Baskin Robbins as a 15-year-old making $185 an hour than I have as a physician for 25 years. No one has ever formally reviewed me. So I just pray that I'm okay.
5 minutes.
Okay, so those were the short term. How about the longer term? These are kind of fun. Sometimes you just have to disrupt old stories. Sometimes you have to change the narrative.
Proud, forgotten, Indian, Navajo, Blackfoot, Inuit, and Sioux, survivor, spiritualist, patriot, Sitting Bull, Hiawatha, and Jim Thorpe, mother, father, son, daughter, chief, Apache, Pueblo, Choctaw, Chippewa, and Crow, underserved, struggling, resilient, Squanto, Red Cloud, Tecumseh, and Crazy Horse, rancher, teacher, doctor, soldier, Seminole, Seneca, Mohawk, and Creek. Mills, Will Rogers, Geronimo. Unyielding, strong, indomitable. Native Americans call themselves many things. The one thing they don't.
Took 88 years to change this mascot to the current commanders. This is great, but it also has challenges because meanwhile, we still have the Atlanta Braves. I mean, if you're Native American, what is your feeling when you see this versus the previous video? Okay, so this other issue is increasing those people in power that would be less prejudiced. That's the hard one. To conclude, this was one of my success stories, but basically I turned Augustine, who I met as a nurse assistant, into the head of health for the organization that brought me to Liberia in 2008 or 2011. And just gonna miss this. Issues of representation in the universities, very difficult to do, but I wanted to conclude that we all have bias, but people of color have less bias than the dominant culture. So I'll conclude with the story that I was just telling my daughter, because I drive her to work on a bicycle every day, to her school on a bicycle every day. I didn't know if I should talk about the war. And I felt, yeah, I have to talk about the war. So we're talking about the war. And then after I corrected her, because at first she wanted to kill everyone involved and then love everyone involved, I said, okay, that's not, it's not so simplistic. She said to me, so is United States acting like what China is to Russia in the Ukraine right now? I'm like, oh my gosh. And I had to think about it a long time, but it reminded me that she was saying that you have to take sides on any issue. And this is from my public health hero, Sylvia Noble-Tesh. And she says, a refusal to speak can have as many health consequences as a willingness to do so. If a possible toxic substance contaminates the air, it is not a neutral act to leave it there. The scientist who knows that a substance may be harmful, but hesitates to advocate for protection policy, acts on matters of principle just as does the scientist who publicly supports protection. This is not an unwarranted intrusion of politics into science. There is not science uninfluenced by politics. And it just reminds me that we as health people must engage even complex issues of race and prejudice if we want to really achieve health and well-being of people that we stand for. Just so you know, I was right in the middle. Thank you so much.
Well, a lot we could spend time on. We have a minute or two for a question or reaction even. Not a question, just a thought. That's a wonderful presentation, many things to think about.
It is, yeah.
And anyone want to say anything? Joe?
I'll ask you one question. I just, having come back from a week overseas, working with people from multiple countries, I mean, part of what you're describing, you're generalizing here around people of color versus others with power, which is, I won't say it's a, strongly American paradigm, but it is, significantly American paradigm. And I'm wondering how you react to the notion of otherness, people in power with people that are other than, having just sort of witnessed people from 14 countries spend 3 days with each other, getting to know each other and beginning to kind of be quite open about their sense of their own culture and that they're sharing that information. So
Yeah.
I think it's just, I just want to get your reaction to it. I mean, I think solving a political problem in this country definitely crucial in the
Yeah.
way you presented it,
Well,
but wondering about the other.
That's why it's so hard to prepare for this talk. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, there's just so many emotions to it. And I think one wrong take home would be that I'm trying to make this a black-white issue. It's not really. It's really a majority versus minority issue in terms of numbers, right? If you have one group that is kind of part of the club, then they're always going to make decisions for the club members. But if there's other people who say, wait a second, I want to be part of that club, that's more likely to happen if there's diversity. So when you go abroad, you go to mainland China, they're not the epitome of equity, right? Their problem is exactly what I said, but it just wouldn't be black and white. It might be Asia, Han and Uyghurs, Han and Tibetan, right? But it's easy for us. It's actually easier for us to talk about these issues, right? Ironically, than other countries, because we're kind of used to the race question. I think we're not very used to the race resolution.
So we'll break, but anyone can stick around and talk. Wilson, thank you. Very provocative.
Thank you
Very
for
good. All right, we don't have more time.
Great.